payment security compliances. So PCSSC is something which comes into the mind of everyone. We'll be giving that overview from how and where this whole standards, PCI DSS and multiple others have started. Then I'll be giving a small overview about critical terminologies which we use so that we all are on the same page. Then we will be talking about a small content about payment brands and their compliance programs. Finally, we'll be moving to payment lifecycle overview, and then a quick glance about PCI DSS and why do we require. And then there is a relationship with other, you can say, security standard under the PCI SSC umbrella. And I'll be giving a graphic and how it's being interrelated. So I'll start the session. The first thing first, what is PCI SSC? PCI SSC is an abbreviation, first of all, and it stands for Payment Card Industry Security Standard Council. It's a consortium of major payment brands across the globe. They combined, they prepared a consortium, they created a forum so that there can be an independent industry standard body which can work on the development of the security standards, which can start the awareness in the community and create an education pattern for you can say community as well as for their auditors. Okay, and they run a program of multiple standards, out of which PCIDSS is one of them. Okay, and they maintain the programs of how to make the auditors eligible, how they make companies eligible. So normally PCSSC don't use a term called auditor. It's a term used by them is called as assessor. Okay, so just people normally understand with the auditor term, that's why I'm been using, but the correct term is assessor. Now, if you see here, there is a term written QSA, and I have given in my introduction also that I am also QSA. So QSA stand for Quality Security Assessor, Qualified Security Assessor, and the main aspect is in a relatable term as a layman, you can compare it as a lead auditor. Okay, but the term given by our council is QSA. So first thing first is council make companies QSA, which is also called as QSA companies, and then those relevant QSAC nominate their employees, which can opt for a QSA. They have to go for a certification exam, and finally they are eligible to do the assessments and audits. Okay, so that's a glance about PCSSC. People should be well aware about it so that they can understand the further nuances. Now, next aspect which I'll be talking about is important terminologies, which is very much relatable. And I start with this particular slide so that you can align myself where I'm trying to convey the stuff. And this is an important term which I'll be using during the webinar as well as during the course of this particular discussion also. Now, when we talk about merchant, like normally these terms are used in payment industry only. Reason behind it has been defined the way it is. When you go with other standards or when you go with the normal industry norms, name may change. Like data privacy, call a different name. People who are from that background may understand a concept called data controller, data processor. Okay, so every industry, I'm talking about compliance industry. Every compliance industry gave their own nomenclatures. Similarly, PCI has given their nomenclature. So this is a nomenclature of PCI which is being followed in financial industry across the globe. So merchant is something, any entity which sells goods or services to end consumer. Like for an example, if I talk about I am an end consumer, okay, I go and buy something, very layman and simple example. So that particular organization or that particular entity is treated as a merchant. Okay. Examples I have highlighted, which is Amazon, Flipkart, Shopper Stop, so on and so forth. Now these merchants can be of two types. One is e-com, m-com. Okay, e-com, m-com refer to e-commerce and mobile commerce. Uh, they are like new age merchants, I can refer it as. And then there are older methods of the merchants, or you can also call it as offline merchants. And there is another name which is also used in the industry called retailers. Okay, like you go to retail shops, correct? Buy some grocery and all. So they are also merchant. Okay, it's not like that only e-com or e-commerce industry is the one which is called as merchant. So there are two concepts: online merchants, offline merchants. Okay, very simple. Offline merchants also referred as retailer. So for an example, Reliance Digital uh, comes under both category. Chroma comes under both category, where they also have their e-com website and they also have their retail shops where you can go and buy and purchase. Now there is, when we are talking about payment, so definitely there is another leg which is also used, another term which is also used, called as payment gateway. Uh, I'll just try to be little relatable and will be a layman so that everyone can understand. Payment gateway, if you understand from a perspective, you might have done some transaction anywhere. So you might have seen that when you go, there is a page comes in where we enter our cardholder information, or we enter our UPI details, or we enter our net banking details also. Okay, so those are the platform which is called as a checkout page or a payment checkout facility, which is offered by an organization, are normally called as payment gateway. There is another term which I'll be using in another slide, which is a little confusing sometimes also between payment gateway and processor. But just to understand, any organization, any entity which offers or supports, or you can also refer it as payment facilitation, which facilitate a payment, uh, is normally called as payment gateway. Live examples are PayU, Razorpay, Paytm. Plural is a, if you have seen, very good. If you have not, then it's a payment gateway of Pine Labs. And normally, I think the name has changed now. It's called as Pine Lab PG, but it is still famous with the term called Plural. Okay, so yeah, this is a reference. I have prepared a slide which will be talking about a payment life cycle, where I'll be explaining more further and relate this term again. Now there is another term which I refer that used in payment lifecycle management is called as payment processor. And at times, uh, most of the people get confused between processor and payment gateway, because there is a reason certain gateway are also processors. Okay, and that's why people get confused sometimes. But I'll just clarify. And as a layman, very basic definition: any organization, any entity which is interacting with merchant, okay, and they are offering their payment facilitation page for, specifically I would say, for e-com websites. In terms of retailers also, if they offer, you can say, payment link, like you get a link on your mobile and then you're rerouted to a payment page. So those are called as payment gateways. Now, when we come to payment processor, it's a more technical organization, more having in depth about the payment life cycle, more interactive in terms of, I would say, with the bank. Interactive, I'm referring in interaction with the banks. Okay, and there is a specific message function which has been defined by the payment industry called as ISO 8583. Okay, so any entity which reads those messages or which works on those lines are normally called as payment processor. But as I referred, there have been instances that processor is also acting as a gateway, because they have both offering. Okay, so I won't deny that processor gateway, there can be overlapping. Yes, there is overlapping, but there are distinctions. So examples are Pine Labs, M2P, Elementally, Euronet, FSS. Most of the times, these organizations are purely B2B, okay, and people might have not heard of it outside of payment industry because they are working in this technical space. Whereas payment gateway, or you can say even you can see on the websites, when we are doing a transaction, you see their logos at times because of that payment page, are more, you can say, relevant in the industry, and people are aware of it. Like Paytm is, people are aware. PayU, people are aware. Razorpay, you see their logos. And at times these are working in the back end, and consumers have not seen their logos. So that's why it's sometimes people are not having a knowledge of it. So just, I hope I clarified. Still, if anyone having a question, we can discuss at later stage. Now, there is another term which is very often used called payment brand. Uh, so I'll go with a relatable term. This is also referred, or there is another name which has been given by the industry called card schemes. So whenever we go to a bank and we get a card, it is backed by a payment network, backed by a card scheme, backed by a payment brand. Okay, so that network with which this card is backed is actually called as payment brand, which you might have people, as a consumer, if you have seen your credit cards, debit cards, prepaid cards, you might have seen these logos: Visa, MasterCard, RuPay, American Express, Diners. There are so many. Okay. So what they do actually, why we have that logo on our cards? Because the bank having a relationship with the card scheme with which they offer you the card, so that wherever we go and do a transaction, uh, there is a intersection, there is a platform which is being used, which does the interoperability between your transaction, between, for an example, one bank to another bank. So there is a network which is used in between, and that's why it is backed, that card is backed by that network. Okay, so this is of the references of payment brand. I'll just take you further. Now, since we have this payment brand, so they have their own compliance programs, they have their own security baselines, and this is a reference I am just trying to give you. I have not covered all the payment brands here. There are other payment brands also, like RuPay is also there, Dana Club is also there. Mostly, I am referring the payment brand which is fairly people are aware of. That's why I have referred. So I'm not neglecting anyone. Okay. So each payment brand has their own compliance program. The name is written here, like American Express runs a compliance program called DSOP, Discover runs DISC, JCB runs DSP, MasterCard runs SDP, and Visa runs CISP. So what this program is all about, what this is all about. So basically, every payment brand has their own security references, their own mechanisms for governance. So earlier, I would say, pre PCI SSC era, these programs were running their own security standards. And let's take an example like ICICI Bank, who is interacting with multi-payment brand, has to undergo both different kind of a standard, like for Visa separate, for MasterCard separate, and that was a problem. So that's the reason they all came together, and that's where I hope now you'll be able to relate what I explained in the first slide. So they all formed a consortium so that we have a unified payment security standard which has to be followed in the industry. So they all came together, and that's where PCSSC emerged. But their compliance program is still active. Now, instead of running their own security baselines or standard, now they are calling PCI SSC standards based on the, you can say, requirements, which standard to enforce uh, is something which has been driven from these compliance programs. We'll be talking about more about this compliance program. So I'll just go to the next slide. Now, what this compliance program actually now cover? So they cover the tracking, they cover the enforcement, because PCI SSC and payment brand has a you can say a difference in terms of responsibility. PCI SSC will not enforce; they'll educate, they'll create awareness, uh, they'll prepare the standard, they'll update the standard. They'll work on the standard. Payment brand are the one which have the responsibility to enforce, to track, to put up the penalties, like in case someone fails, in, to put up the deadlines for the compliance, validation process, so on and so forth. Defining level, so there are multiple levels which has been defined, which level who has to undergo. So that is all taken care by payment brand compliance programs. Now, payment brand also are responsible for defining rules of forensic investigation. For an example, if any breach happens, okay, that PCI SSC doesn't define, payment brand define. So there is a distinction of the responsibilities which has been assigned and which has been taken care of. Now, as I have referred, payment brand is the member of the our council, and they are responsible for, again, same references, that they are responsible for enforcement, forensic investigation, and there is also a responsibility which has been given to the payment brand is to connect with PCI SSC very closely, give feedback to the council on the assessor's performance. Like for an example, eventually assessor, which is nothing but the auditor. So assessors, auditors who are working in the industry, certifying a particular client, and our payment brand is responsible to update the council about the feedback of the assessor if they have anything. Okay, so that's why they closely interact. They also gives the feedback about how industry is behaving, how things are evolving, how technology is changing. So based on that, council prepares new standards. So you can say every standard has their own life cycle program, and council have the interactions with the industry also, where they involve payment brands. It's called as community meeting, but eventually they all closely interact with each other, so that whatever things are or technology is getting evolved, council is aware and they are working in the back end on the standard, or updating the standard, or creating a new standard altogether. Now there is another term which is being used. I'll be giving a reference in a payment lifecycle diagram in much more detail, but for here as a reference, I'll give an understanding. Uh, Acquirer is a bank. Let's understand very clearly. There are two terms which is being used: issuer and acquirer. So issuer is the one which issues the card. It's also a bank. It's a issuer bank. And acquirer, if as a layman, I'll make you understand very, very simple. It's called as merchant's bank. Okay. So now we'll be talking about in detail when I explain you the payment life cycle, but I'll just tell you what are the responsibilities of the acquirer. Since acquirer are the one which closely interacts with the merchant, so acquirer are responsible to govern their compliance programs for their merchant, determine their level, determine their reporting process, procedures in the case of data breach, and make themselves familiar with the payment brand compliance programs and closely interact with the payment brand. See, there can be use cases where acquirer is having an interaction with multiple payment brands, so it has to closely align himself as the organization to follow those compliance program requirements. So we have been talking about payment and all those aspects. I'll just give a quick glance about what is a payment card. This is how it looks. I hope you must have seen your own card somewhere in your life. This is just an example uh, how a card looks like. Okay, so this is the section. If you can see my arrow, this is the section where you will get the logo of the card network or payment brand or card scheme, three names commonly used. This is the section where normally you'll see the logo of your bank. Okay, there have been use cases where we get co-branded cards. Okay, like Amazon Pay card, Flipkart card. Okay, so in that scenario, the co-brand will come in the this section, which is the leftmost section. If it's not a co-branded card, then the only logo which you'll see is the payment brand and the bank. which bank has issued the card. Now there is a section where you'll see a chip. Now that chip is referred as a EMV chip. EMV is another consortium which I'll not be talking about today in this webinar, but just a quick glance, I'll say it's another consortium which works on the text specification. So EMV is a text specification which another consortium takes care of, and these all consortium, EMV, PCI SSC, and payment brand, these all have a very close interaction. So you may have a question why we have another consortium. So the main aspect is EMB takes care of text specification, PCI SSC takes care of payment governance, payment security governance. Okay, that's the difference. In the bottom section, we normally see a name of the cardholder, and if we have applied from corporate, then we normally also see the corporate name, or a couple of banks run their reference number called customer reference number, CRN. So we know sometimes see CRN numbers also. It depends from issue to issue. In the back, there is this black screen which is called as max type, and there is a 3-digit code which is used. It's called as CVV. So this is an interesting thing. And you can see the table here also. So each payment brand has their own name, but more or less it's talking about a security code, which we refer as a cardholder verification value, which is used when you are doing a transaction on e-com website, and it's something being used to determine whether a cardholder itself is doing a transaction. So there is another security layer which is being used. We have another layer now. You might have used on the websites where we get OTP. Okay, that is called as 3D secure. But this is a pre-era of 3DS CVV, and it's still active. Most of the use cases we enter the CVV, and this value something is a sensitive value. So that's why it's printed on the back of the card. It's not printed on the front of the card from security perspective. And at times, if someone has seen, I have seen personally that I received a card and the CVV was printed with a sticker, so that it's not visible, and I have to remove the sticker to view my CVV. People who are not that aware, they remove the sticker and throw it, but actually you should not. So you should hide your CVV, because with CVV, transaction can get successful and we get some trouble, blah 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 blah. We'll be talking about detail in somewhere later section. Now the main aspect is, which you might not be aware, or if you are aware, good that we are having this info. Each payment brand has their own name. So Visa call it as CVV, Mastercard call it as CVC, Discover call it as CID, American Express also call it as CID, JCB call it as CAV, Union Pay call it as CVN. More or less, purpose is cardholder verification. That's the purpose. But the old program uh, have their own references of highlighting this value with their own name. Interesting aspect is, if you can see here, or if someone has given a view, all payment brands have 3-digit. However, American Express has 4-digit. Yeah. So there is a difference in American Express card, and there is one more difference is all print this value in the back. However, American Express prints in the front. Definitely, there is a use case from American Express to do that, and that's driven in their own compliance programs. But that's the way it is. I'll go to the next slide. So this was the a payment life cycle I was talking about, and I hope now you can relate more on this particular diagram. This is a very basic diagram. Payment life cycle is way more complex than this, but just to make everyone understand the nuances of a payment life cycle. So this is one of the starting points. Okay. Now I'll just give a run through. Wherever, for an example, we go and do a transaction. So normally people who, or you can say not people, consumers, Okay, so end consumers who wants to purchase some goods or services, they use their card. You have other methods also, UPI, net banking, yes, but we are talking about cards. Okay, so those consumers are also referred with another term called card holder. So I am holding this card, correct? As a layman, if you can understand very simple terms. So I am a card holder. I go and I do a transaction on a merchant. So as I given you a reference in the terminology, merchants who interacts with consumer. So I go and do a transaction. It can be retailer, it can be e-com. So I do a transaction, and normally, for an example, I'm using. Let's take an example. I'm using an ICICI Bank credit card or debit card. So my issuer is ICICI Bank because that bank has issued me a card. So my money is with that bank, and I'm doing a transaction on a merchant, or let's take an example, Reliance Retail. So I'm doing a transaction on Reliance Retail, and Reliance Retail has no, for an example, relationship with ICICI Bank. Reliance Retail has their relationship, or you can say their bank is HDFC. Okay, that's why I'm referring this term acquirer as a merchant bank. Okay, so this transaction will go to an acquirer, and that's how acquirer name is given, because it acquires a transaction. So transaction will go to an acquirer. Acquirer will understand that this card is issued from which payment brand, and it will route that transaction to a payment brand. Payment brand will understand that this card is of which bank. Okay, because payment brand has issued having a license with the bank, so it will identify. How it will identify? It's very basic. That I'll take you to the previous slide. So there is this card number which is printed, and there is a relationship. From this card number, you can identify that it is from which issuer. How you can identify? The first six digit of the card number is called as bank identification number or issuer identification number, BIN or IAN. These are the two terms which is used. With that, payment brands identify it's of which issuer, and they route the transaction to the issuer. Issuer will authenticate you. Based on your authentication, they will go for authorization, that whether you have the money to do that transaction. If yes, they'll give the response. Response reaches back to the acquirer, and eventually it reaches back to the merchant that payment is successful or failed. Payment successful or failed are based on the criteria whether I have authenticated a card correctly, or whether I have the balance of that money for which I'm doing a transaction. Based on that, we get the response. So the main purpose is, this is the way a payment transaction happens, and this is what it is called as a payment life cycle. I'll go further, and now we will be talking about PCI DSS. What is PCI DSS, and why it's being invoked here, why it is being called in the payment industry, and why the people has to undergo this particular certification. We'll be talking about all these whys. But before we talk about that, we understand what this is all about. So payment card industry, PCI SSC, Payment Card Industry Council, prepared a standard called DSS. Okay, so standard name is actually DSS, but it's being referred in the industry as PCI DSS. So DSS is Data Security Standard. So PCI SSC build, or you can say better word is as prepared. They prepared this standard as a uniformity among all the payment brands, which I was talking about in the beginning. So they prepared this standard for the uniformity, and the objective was security and privacy of cardholder information. That's the objective. And PCI DSS was prepared. It is being enforced by the payment brand, as I have given the reference, and the organization who are part of payment lifecycle has to undergo. This is a layman's story. But if you go by the definition, any entity which stores, process, transfers cardholder information, or can impact the security of cardholder information has to undergo this PCI DSS assessment. Okay, and they have to obtain the credentials of PCI DSS, which normally we refer to as certification. You have to get the certificate. Okay. Now, this standard has been adopted by all the payment brands of the council. So council, as I told you, is a consortium of multiple payment brand. So all the payment brand enforce. There are payment brand which are not part of council, and they also enforce. So if we talk about in India, RuPay. RuPay is not part of PCI SSC payment brand member, but RuPay is also associated with PCI SSC, and they also enforce PCI DSS standard. Similarly, there are other local players. I'll take an example. In Africa, there is a player called Verve. Okay, so they also enforce PCI DSS, but they are not part of council. Okay, but they are closely interact with the council. They are, you can say, community members, associate members, participating organization. So they participate, but they are not part of the council members. Okay. So one question which I face multiple times from my customers, that is PCIDSS applicable to all kind of cards? So I'll just clarify here. Any kind of card, whether it is prepaid card, it is debit card, it is credit card, or it is single one-time use card. There are gift cards now which are like you can only use one time. Even if it is of that scenario, PCI DSS is applicable. We'll be talking about this applicability in another slide also, but just to give you in clarity, any kind of XYZ DAM card, PCI DSS is applicable. So one of the important aspect is it's a standard, it's not a regulation, it's not a law. So there is no law, like for an example, data privacy is a law that you have to follow. Okay. PCI DSS is not a law. It's driven by a council. It is not driven by any government agency or central regulator, but at times it can become a regulation. So I'll give an example. Like I have seen couple of countries like Nigeria in Africa market, which has mandated that all the banks has to get PCI DSS certificate. Not just bank, I'm saying the whole ecosystem of the financial industry, which starts majorly with the bank. They have to undergo. Now, if we talk about India, RBI has also enforced, and it is putting huge amount of pressure on all the financial institutions, including PSU banks, to undergo PCI DSS. However, the way Nigeria has implemented, it's not the same. I would say RBI has released the multiple circulars, has released multiple framework, and they are enforcing, but not in the similar fashion the way Nigeria is enforcing. But we can say yes, enforcement is coming in India as well. Okay, so we have been talking about PCI DSS. What is this PCI DSS all about? So PCI DSS has 6 goals, and objective is very clear: security and privacy of cardholder information. Okay, now how that objective is met? They define 6 goals, which further divides into 12 requirements. Uh, so I'll be taking you through on the goals. Build, maintain secure network, which is talking about the infrastructure requirements. Uh, Wherever this payment ecosystem environment is being stipulated, we protect the infrastructure. If we talk about protection of the info, first thing first is we have to protect the perimeter. If as a layman you can understand, so that's what it talks about. Second goal is, which is the crux of the PCI DSS or the objective, which is protection of the cardholder information. So goal 2 covers the protection part. It's going at the data level, going at the application layer level, okay, and how we protect the information. There are tons of requirements. Uh, I won't say tons of requirement. I would say it stipulate into 2 requirement. If you can see in the diagram, protect stored information and encrypt transmission of the cardholder information during the open channel. There are 2 requirement, but there are multiple controls. Okay, within those 2 requirement, how to deal with this particular 2 goal. Okay, so it spreads into multiple controls and organization has to follow that. Then there is something which is called as maintain a vulnerability management program. So definitely, if we are there in the tech industry, vulnerabilities are part and parcel of our life, and it will come across. So there is this goal which further divides into two requirement, which is talking about the vulnerability management. And then we comes into another goal called access control. Okay, wherever an environment will be there, wherever a infrastructure will be there, there will be questions about the access. Okay, so there have been requirements on the access control, which also further divides into three requirements. Those requirements further divides into multiple controls. Okay, now the main aspect is there are two sections of access control. One is logical access control, which is talking about our production environment, and then there is physical access control, where my infra is being hosted, how physically it is protected. Okay, how physically we have our access uh, definement. So it divides into two. However, in terms of requirement, it divides into three. And the physical access is the requirement 9, which you can see, the last one of the access control goal. This one talks about the physical, other two talks about the logical access control. Now we have covered the goals of our perimeter, which is infrastructure. We covered the data layer, we covered the vulnerability management program, and we covered the access control. Now the fifth section or fifth goal is about monitoring and testing. Okay, we test and monitor our environment. So this is where now it further divides into uh, two requirement, which is talking about the monitoring and testing aspect. And finally, we reaches to the sixth goal, which further divides into only into one requirement. Again, wherever I say one requirement, it doesn't mean one uh, references of the requirement. That requirement further divides into multiple controls, all the one. Okay. So I have not been saying in every aspect of the requirement, but yes, it's further divided into multiple controls. Okay, we are not talking about all those controls here. It's a small webinar. So the last goal is talking about the governance model, how we govern and how we run this program across an organization. So maintain an information security policy is the name written in the goal, but actually it's talk about the governance, how we address it. Okay, so it's not just one that we have to maintain an infosec policy. No, it's not like that. It's one of the control. Okay, which will be talking about in this particular requirement. But there are other requirement. I mean, there are other controls also there, which will be talking about our governance. So I would rate it as a infosec governance. Now, since I believe we have covered lots of section in our webinar, we covered payment brand, we covered PCI DSS. Now, question arise on the applicability: who has to undergo? So, if you see our payment life cycle, okay, uh, anyone who comes under this particular life cycle, any entity, okay, definitely apart from cardholder, they doesn't undergo PCI DSS. But apart from that, whoever is being involved has to undergo PCI DSS. The only thing is payment brand also undergoes PCI DSS. They also get their environment certified. But only payment brand governs themselves. Okay, so they are not, or you can say central bank may have interaction with the payment brand, but since payment brand themselves are doing the enforcement, so no one can question payment brand. Okay, they run their own certifications as well. So payment, it's a top down approach. Payment brand forces banks, banks forces merchant forces their service providers. Okay, so service provider, I have not used this term in our terminology earlier because I wanted to cover here with this diagram. Normally, as a layman, service provider are nothing but called as vendor. Okay. So for any XYZ reason, I may have multiple vendor, and as the objective and the as the applicability or definition of PCI DSS, the any entity stores, process, transmit, or impact the security of the cardholder information has to undergo PCI. So for an example, let's take merchant. Merchant is taking cardholder information. They have to. They have a service provider, a vendor called payment gateway, who is facilitating the payment. So that payment gateway has to undergo. Now, for an example, that payment gateway is having a vendor which is hosting their infrastructure. Okay, so as you have seen the goals, there is physical security also, there is access control also. So where my environment is being hosted, that data center provider, that cloud provider, they also have to undergo. So they are not storing card, but they may impact the security of the card. Okay, so I won't go in further detail here, but you can just simply understand whoever is being involved in payment lifecycle from whichever industry you may are of. If you interact with card data, you impact the security of card data, you have to undergo this particular certification. Now, there is another term which is used called as account data. Okay, so account data is actually, if you can see in the diagram, it's actually a combination of two words, which is cardholder data and sensitive authentication data. And collectively, if I'm talking that reference, I refer this term as account data. Okay. Now, what cardholder data is and what SAD, which is sensitive authentication data, is, I'll give you a run through. So, primary account number, that 16-digit card number, is called as PAN. In India, we also have a PAN number which is used in our, or you can say, relative with our income tax department. Uh, they also call it as PAN. The only difference among the two is the full form. That is called as permanent account number, and the way that numbering is being stipulated is very different from how we receive the 16 digit card number. Okay, so that's, don't get confused. That is permanent account number. This is primary account number. Okay, uh, but both are referred as PAN. Yeah, that's correct. So it creates a confusion in the market. So whatever you can see on the front part, I'm just saying as a layman, whatever you see in the front part of the card, mostly those are part of cardholder data. PAN, cardholder name, service code is not visible. That's why I said mostly. Okay, service code and expiration date. We see that expiry. Okay, so this is what it's called as card data. Now there is sensitive authentication data. We see that max type contains some sensitive information which is called as track info or track data. Then CVV, as I told, it's a sensitive value, so it's part of sensitive authentication data. And then PIN. So this CVV PIN are normally used for authenticating the card. Okay, PIN is normally used at when we are doing the transaction at retailer. CVV is more used in the section when we are doing a transaction at ecom or mcom website or mcom mobile application. Okay. Now the main aspect is in the account data, cardholder data. We have the references that we can store, but sensitive authentication data we can't store. It's strictly prohibited. In terms of protection of cardholder data, these values, card name, service code, expiration, we can store like as clear text. However, card number we can't store. So the very basic concept in PCI DSS or in the control, is there a business requirement to store card number? If you don't have, then don't store. If you have a business viability or you have a requirement or you have a use case, you can. There is no prohibition, but you can't store in clear text. You have to protect. You have to protection has multiple ways. I'll not go in that detail right now, but there are multi ways of protecting. But you have to protect. You can't just store as clear text value. Now let's talk about version of the PCI DSS. So this PCI DSS has been running in the industry for long. Multiple versions have came in. The latest version, which is running right now, is the 4.0 family. This 4.0 was released somewhere in March 2022. Then there was a good amount of timeline given to the industry to migrate. You can say almost 2 years, and then 4.0 was enforced. Okay, so you can see 31st March 2024, 3.2.1, which is the earlier version of the 4.0 family, got sunset. So post 1st April 2024, 4.0 was active. Okay, now there in that standard also, there were a couple of requirements which were, you can say, future dated. So that was active from 31st March 2025. Okay. So till that, people have undergone 4.0 certification. But now 4.0.1, a minor newer version of the 4.0 family has been released. The only difference is that wherever it was written as future dated requirement, it got mandated. Okay. Because 31st March, as you can understand, it has already passed and all the requirements are active now, and you have to undergo those particular, or you have to comply with those controls. But if we were there in the transition between 24 and 25, still multiple new controls were treated as, you can refer it as the future dated requirement. But now it is no more. You have to comply. Now, beauty of PCI DSS is, if a control is applicable, either you are compliant or you are non-compliant. There is no if and but, or that I can get a certificate with minor NC, non-conformity, the how it is being treated in ISO. In PCI, it is not like that. Either you comply or you don't comply. If you comply, then only you will get the certificate. If you don't comply, even for example, one control you don't comply, you will not get the certificate. You have to remediate that finding. So this is that's why PCI is normally called as a tough standard. So in a glance, I can just trying to give you a reference. Who are aware about 4.0 transition, well and good. If not, I'm just giving a very, very high level overview. From earlier version of 3.2.1, we can call it as 3.2 family. From that to 4.0, it was a major change in the version of the PCI DSS. So there were some consisting elements. So consistent part was, yes, we still have our 12 principal requirement, which is the 6 goals. We still have the same scoping criteria, and we still have the compensatory control. Compensatory control is a reference which is used when I'm unable to comply with a particular control, but I have proper safeguard, like I'm compensating myself of not implementing that particular control with some other protection I may have. So the auditor works with the, or I use the correct term, QSA. So QSA works with the company and they create a compensatory control that, yes, they don't comply with that, but they comply with something similar, or they meet the objective, and that what it is referred as compensatory control. So that is still the same. There is no change. Now the question is, what has changed? Okay, what was the changes? So changes were in these three types. There were some requirements which got involved. There were some changes based on the industry feedback. Some you can say criterias got changed. Like for an example, password policy. This earlier it was 8 character, now it was 12 character. So requirement evolved. Then there was uh, some clarification about the control, some additional guidance were given. And third was structure and format. So certain structure, how a report should look like, that got changed. Certain format got changed. The way QSA defines the or prepares the report, that got changed. Okay. And some new sections were also introduced. Okay. Apart from that 12 requirements. We will not be discussing that in detail right now, but just to give a high level overview, those were introduced. Total 64 new controls came in from earlier, you can say, in comparison with the 3.2 family. 4.0 family had 64 new controls, 53 were applicable to all, 11 were just applicable to the service provider. So I told you there is a term called service provider, there is a term called merchant. So in PCI, certificate is also categorized into two categories. PCI DSS for merchant, PCI DSS for service provider. So certain controls are applicable to all. Certain controls are only applicable to the service provider. So if you are a merchant, those controls are not applicable. This is a infographic which makes you familiar with multiple standard which is being there in the industry. PCI DSS is the basic one, but there are other, and it is basis on the, you can say, a specific objective. PCI DSS has the objective of cardholder information protection, but apart from cardholder information, there are other specific objectives also. So I gave a reference. You can see merchant bank is also written here. So if I gave a reference, like we do a transaction and a OTP on e-com and a OTP comes in. So this is called as 3DS, 3 domain security. So there is a separate standard. So any entity which are involved in that particular mechanism has to undergo another certification. There are nuances where these cards gets produced. It's called as, or you can say produced. I can refer it as another term called printed. So they also have to undergo another two standard, which is talking about card production. Physical, logical, they are two separate standard. Then there are use cases where companies are acting as token service provider. What it means, I have not explained in this webinar, but probably you can search it. RBI, if someone is from payment industry, may able to understand. RBI also released a circular that merchants can't store card number now. So other central bank has also released something similar. I have seen in Australia. So there they interact with certain section of the companies which store those card number on their behalf, and they issue the token. Okay. So this is just a very basic layman example. It's way more complex than this. So there are companies which work in that category has to undergo this token service provider. Then there are you can say companies which are working, or you can say banks which are working very closely with the a particular sensitive authentication data called PIN, which are very closely interacting with that particular information, has to undergo another standard called PIN security, and so on and so forth. So there are multiple standards. I'll not explain each and every one, but just trying to give this infographic as an info. PCI DSS is not the only standard. It's, I would say, starting point. And if someone is there in the financial industry or very technical in the deep fintech space, they may have to undergo multiple PCI standards based on the objective they are catering in the, or based on the services they are offering in the market.